In the narrow chamber of aged oak, the scent of incense still lingers, soaked into the wood after Mass. Darkness is not complete, yet light is not enough to reveal all. A thin beam filters through the lattice of the confessional, falling across trembling hands folded tightly together. You are a priest, long accustomed to confessions, lies, greed, desire. But tonight the voice that breaks the silence makes your blood run cold. It does not tremble with fear. It carries something older, heavier, something forbidden. Father, the voice rasps, there is a prophecy, one never meant to survive in Scripture. They erased it, but some remember sweat beads at your temple. The words drift like wind through a graveyard, carrying the damp smell of earth and secrets long buried. You want to interrupt, to insist the church does not permit tales outside the canon. Yet something roots you in place. Perhaps it is instinct, or perhaps the fragile thread between fear and truth. You remember your seminary days when an old professor once whispered, "Not everything was written, and not everything written was allowed to survive the councils." You thought it metaphor. Now, in the hush of the confessional, it echoes like a warning. The penitent continues, faster now, as if fearing unseen ears. Before Noah, before the flood, the watchers rebelled. Not Lucifer, not the serpent. Others, they swore an oath, descended, taught mankind forbidden arts. And the prophecy says, their mark has never faded. You swallow hard. The name Semjaza rises in your mind, a name you know from Enoch, the chained manuscript locked away like a criminal in the archives. Bishops dismissed it as fraud. Yet why does your heart thunder when that name flickers across the partition? You force calm into your voice. Where did you hear this? Silence. Only ragged breath. Then, from pages torn out, from lips that never forgot. Father, they say the church buried it because the truth would shake the foundations of faith. Your fingers closed tight around the crucifix at your chest. Behind your eyelids, you see angels of fire stepping down from clouded mountains, carrying secrets like poisoned springs. This is no ordinary confession. It feels like a torch passed through generations, and tonight it has found you. The candle outside flickers. Shadows lean closer, as if listening. You feel your heartbeat loud against the hush. The penitent's final whisper barely exists. Search the old manuscripts, Father. You will find traces. But beware, once read, they cannot be forgotten. Then nothing. The booth is empty. Only you remain, the silence heavier than any sin. You cover your mouth with your hand, as though to cage the words inside. Were those truly the echoes of fallen angels, or merely a trial of faith? Yet one thought persists. The church can bury truth, but the earth does not always keep its graves shut. You light another candle. Its flame wavers, as though eyes unseen watch from the dark. In that instant, you know, you have crossed a threshold. The prophecy lives, and now you must choose. Lock it away again, or let its whisper breathe into the world. You sit at your desk with Sunday's sermon half-formed, the notes like stray feathers that refuse to settle. The chapel beyond the sacristy is a hushed ocean, pews lined like ribs of a sleeping leviathan. You dip the pen, lift it, hesitate. A sermon should begin with a verse, a parable, a gentle road into mercy. Instead, your hand writes a single line, as if of its own will. There are names that are not for preaching. The ink dries quickly, too quickly, like something eager to be sealed. You blot it out, but the faint ghost remains, hovering just beneath the surface of the page, the way an unspoken thought lingers beneath the tongue. The bell in the tower counts a slow measure, Each toll is a footstep in the corridor of your mind, walking toward a door you meant to keep shut. On the shelf, the Bible lies open where you left it, the ribbon marker resting at a safe passage, comforting, pastoral, harmless. Yet your eyes keep drifting to the margins, to the places where the paper looks rubbed thin, as though fingers through the centuries pressed there, searching for something missing. You know the feeling too well. A text that ends too neatly, a gap that behaves like a seam. In seminary, you learn the right shapes for reverence. Pronounce the canon with care. Handle apocrypha like ash, never inhale. But the rumor from the confessional still smolders, and it leaks its smoke through your study. Names. Some names are bridges, some are snares. The old teacher said that to speak a thing truly is to touch its essence. That is why blessings use names, and why curses do too. You try to pray the thought away, yet your prayer catches like a thread on a hidden nail. You pull the shutters tighter, strike a fresh candle, and turn to your modest archive. Homilies, letters, a worn concordance, a guarded folder of notes from professors who wrote more than they published. At the bottom, almost by accident, you find the thin booklet you swore to read only once. Excerpts copied by an ancestor in orders long dead, a tangle of hand and ink, the script too careful to be casual, too risked to be official. You do not open it, not yet. First, you write another sentence. There are names the church remembers by choosing not to speak them. The logic is clean as glass. If a thing is nothing, it does not need erasing. Only live coal requires tongs. You think of the catalog of saints and the litany of demons, the two columns taught to trainees like coordinates on a map. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, bright steps up a ladder, then the common adversary with his ordinary, overfamiliar titles. But there are others that live between these columns, like letters erased, but still visible if the page is tilted toward the light. Names that do not appear in the readings, yet haunt the art. Names banned from altars, yet encircling them in stone and color. Names the faithful never hear, but which the old windows and carved capitals seem to murmur when the nave is empty. You remember a stained panel in a cathedral you loved during study. A wheel alive with eyes, a form too many-winged to sit comfortably in memory, and at the panel's corner, nearly lost in the border, a giant footprint beside a shepherd's staff. No inscription, no label, only a rumor in glass. Once a docent said it depicted the days of Noah. But the footprint was too large, too deliberate, too much like a signature the artist hoped only the wary would recognize. You had walked away then, certain you were imagining. Tonight, the old colored light walks back into your study unasked. You open the booklet. The hand is cramped, reverent, exhausted. The first page is a list without commentary. Simjaza, Azazel, Armajos, Barakiel, Penimu. The sequence knots the air. Your tongue tastes metal, as if the names themselves have weight, and the act of reading forces you to carry them. The list ends with a warning in a different ink, the scribe's voice coming up through time. Not for the pulpit, for watchfulness only. You close the booklet gently. You're not sure whether you obey the warning by shutting it or betray the warning by having looked at all. On your desk, a draft sermon waits. Beatitudes, patience, the easy virtues that keep villages from hemorrhaging. You could return to it now. Stitch in a psalm, polish the cadence, sleep. Yet you see the faces of confessants you have known, eyes rimmed with a fear too articulate to be mere guilt. The mother who dreamed of a voice offering her knowledge to make her children shine. The merchant who woke with a recipe for extracting pure metal and would not say from where. The young scholar who heard, in the hum of the stars, a grammar not taught in any classroom. You had dismissed these as coincidences: grief, ambition, youth. But the names on the page hum back. You whisper one, not aloud, but inside the mind where prayer and peril share a chamber. It lands like a pebble dropped into a deep well. You wait for the splash. No sound returns. Then, suddenly, a draft stirs the candle. The flame leans, recovers, leans again, as if some breath without lungs sought to pronounce a reply. You straighten your back, cross yourself, and throttle the urge to test the rest of the list like a child tasting from jars forbidden by a wiser parent. You consider the theology of absence. The church does not so much forget as curate. Some threads are wound into vestments, others are wound around doors to keep them shut. When a name vanishes from the lectionary but finds refuge in the fresco, that is not carelessness. That is diplomacy. It is how a body might carry a bullet near the heart, quietly, indefinitely, so that walking remains possible. The question, you realize, is not whether the names are real. The church has always admitted more realities than it dared to define. The question is whether speaking them makes the wound bleed again. A knock at the sacristy startles you. Only the wind shouldering the door. In the sudden stillness after, the silence feels jointed, alive, as if multiple silences take turns holding their breath. You write another line. The danger is not in knowing the names, but in being known by them. The sentence trembles. You blot it, but you do not strike it out. There is a prayer for priests tempted by forbidden study, though it is rarely printed. You half remember it now, assemble it from tatters. Guard me from lights that do not warm, from words that do not heal, from knowledge that sharpens pride and blunts mercy. You speak it slowly, and the room steadies. The booklet remains on the desk, neither open nor hidden. Like a relic no one has declared authentic, yet no one dares discard. Your sermon takes a new turn, though no listener will notice. You will preach on humility, on the cost of names, on the God who reveals by veiling and veils by revealing. You will not pronounce the erased names. You will let the congregation feel, instead, the shape of a door behind the wall, and you will warn them, without saying why, that not every invitation deserves a reply. At last, you rise. You pinch the candle wick, and in the last curl of smoke you imagine letters. Tiny, silver, dissolving. You put the booklet back, not in the bottom, but not at the top either. You are a priest between pages, the page that speaks and the page that is silent, the page the faithful read and the page that reads the faithful. Tomorrow you will lift the chalice as always, and somewhere in the tall quiet of the nave, in glass and stone and line and shadow, the unsaid will breathe with you, close enough to hear its heartbeat, far enough not to learn its true name. You turn the key in the study door. The corridor listens. The church sleeps. Out beyond the stained windows, the stars arrange themselves into old arguments. You do not read them tonight. You bow your head, receive the darkness like a hood, and carry with you a final sentence that will never reach the homily. There are names never to be spoken, not because they are false, but because they are powerful. And the first measure of power is silence. The church bells are still hours from their first call, yet you are awake, seated at your desk in the dim glow of a single taper. The parish sleeps. Only you keep vigil. The booklet of names lies where you left it, its cover plain, its weight somehow greater than paper should allow. You touch it but do not open it. Your hand rests there as though on a reliquary, unsure whether to venerate or to fear. remember the oath. Not yours, not yet, but theirs. The Watchers. The rumor carved into Enoch's pages like a scar across history. 200 angels, it is said, bound themselves on a mountain peak, not in rebellion against God outright, but in hunger for what was never theirs. The daughters of men, the fleeting flesh of earth. The story claims Semjaza, their leader, feared that one alone would falter, so he bound them all with a covenant of betrayal. We will descend together, he is supposed to have sworn. And they did. Your lips move around the memory, tasting the shape of words you have never spoken aloud. What does it mean for a heavenly being to swear an oath? Is it not already enough that their existence is itself a vow of service? The paradox gnaws at you. Angels swore by heaven, and in so swearing broke it. As a priest, you know the weight of promises, vows at the altar, whispered confessions sworn to secrecy, the solemnity of ordination. Oath-breaking among men fractures trust. Oath-breaking among angels must have fractured creation itself. The candle flickers, throwing restless shadows against the walls. They lean long and tall, like silent giants attending your meditation. For a moment, you imagine them listening. You imagine the stones remembering. Perhaps they do. Old cathedrals carry more than dust. Your mind wanders to a teaching long set aside. The fathers of the church once warned against idle oaths, urging that only God's name sanctifies a promise. What then does it mean that angels swore in the name of their own desire? Perhaps that is the core of sin, not rebellion born of hatred, but a vow made to the wrong love. The story does not present them as devils yet, not as tempters, but as beings caught between loyalty and longing. That thought unsettles you more than images of horns and pitchforks. Desire is familiar. Desire you confess daily. Desire you see in your own reflection when you linger too long over memory. You whisper a prayer, but it is thin, faltering. Your heart is heavy, not from temptation, but from recognition. If even angels could fall by a vow mislaid, how fragile is your own priestly word? You recall moments in confession where you promised consolation, but carried doubt, where you spoke of forgiveness, but feared your own sins. Are you different from them? Or only weaker, without wings to break in falling? The booklet waits, silent. You open it at last. A hand-drawn image greets you, crude, hurried, but clear. A mountain crowned with fire, a circle of figures etched against the night sky. Their hands are joined, their eyes lifted toward something unseen. Beneath it, a scrawl. The oath is their chain. You feel a chill. It is not rebellion that damned them. It was the binding of themselves to desire, a self-made covenant that no divine word could sanctify. And you realize, with dread clarity, that the world has been feeling the aftershock of that oath ever since. The gifts they offered, knowledge of metals, of enchantments, of stars, were the dowry of their betrayal. Humanity carries the inheritance still, every hammer and blade, every charm and chart, an echo of that mountain night. The candle guttered low. You kneel, trying to pray it away. Yet prayer feels like shouting into a chasm. The air tastes metallic, like blood in your mouth. You remember the voice in the confessional? Once you know, you cannot forget. You rise slowly. The church floor creaks under your step. Each board sounds like a witness, each echo like a verdict. You clutch the booklet to your chest as though it might burn you. Yet your fingers refuse to let go. It feels less like a choice now, more like a summons. At the altar, you pause. The crucifix above looks down, Christ's eyes painted in agony, yet strangely patient. You whisper, "What would you have me do with this knowledge?" Only silence answers, heavy as stone. Perhaps silence is the answer. Perhaps this is what the fathers meant by mysteries too dangerous for the pulpit. But even silence has weight, and you feel the burden settling on you like vestments made of lead. You extinguish the candle. The last curl of smoke climbs upward, a frail imitation of prayer. In the dark, you hear your own breath, steady yet not your own. For a fleeting instant, you think you hear voices, a chorus not of praise but of promise, echoing from a mountain none dare name. The oath still reverberates, and now, by hearing it, you fear you have stepped into its circle. You cross yourself, though your hand trembles. "Deliver us from evil," you whisper. The words float, uncertain, then vanish into the waiting dark. The morning sun filters pale through the high windows, yet the light feels colder than the night before. You stand at the lectern, rehearsing lines for the homily. The faithful will soon gather, expecting comfort, guidance, bread for their weary souls. Yet your thoughts cling stubbornly to the whispers of the watchers, to the covenant of fire and betrayal on the mountain. How can one speak of mercy when one carries knowledge of poison? You close the missal, your fingers trembling. The passage prepared for today is simple, a story of Christ feeding the multitude. But behind the bread, you cannot help but see the counterfeit gifts, the knowledge bestowed not to nourish, but to corrupt. Your mind drifts to the old catalog of forbidden arts, the shaping of metal, the mixing of paints and powders, the charting of the heavens. These were not blessings, but snares, each wrapped in wonder to mask the fangs beneath. That evening, alone in your study, you unfold the booklet again. A marginal note runs down the side of the parchment, its script slanted and urgent. The gifts gleam, but they bite. Your gaze lingers on the list. The names are paired with inventions, as if to brand each angel with the curse he brought. Azazel with the forging of blades, Penemu with the writing of charms, Barachiel with the study of stars. You whisper the words under your breath, tasting ash. You imagine the first human who held a blade shaped from stone into steel, marveling at its brilliance. How quickly wonder turned to blood. The angels, the text claims, did not hand humanity wisdom for love's sake. They gave tools sharp enough to sever the bond between heaven and earth. Every forge is a memory of Azazel. Every charm murmured over sickness is a faint echo of Penemu's whisper. Every chart of constellations is a remnant of lessons taught by those who fell. Your hand strays to the crucifix again. You want to drop the thought, to return to safe ground. Yet a confession surfaces from months past. A young man, pale, eyes burning with fervor, had spoken of dreams in which stars shifted, aligning into words he almost understood. He asked if the church knew of such patterns. You dismissed it as imagination. Now the memory returns like a thorn pressing through cloth. The gifts are not gone. They lie dormant, stirring in dreams, in inventions, in hungers we pretend are progress. You see it in the farmer who sharpens tools beyond need, in the widow who clutches powders and charms as if they might buy back life, in scholars who peer at the heavens not to glorify God, but to rewrite his order. It is all the same inheritance, the same poisoned dowry. You whisper, why allow it? Why permit angels to sow ruin? The only answer is silence, heavy and infinite. Yet you feel a strange clarity. Perhaps the test of mankind is not in resisting ignorance, but in resisting the seduction of knowledge. A blade is not evil in itself, yet it was born of evil intent. A star is not false, yet its map can become a net. The gifts gleam because they are true, but they bite because they are misused. The candle at your desk gutters. Its wax drips like blood from a wounded hand. You see the world in fragments. Smiths at the forge. Powders ground by secret hands. The sky mapped by quills on parchment. Each vision overlaps, weaving into a tapestry both wondrous and terrible. You understand, suddenly, why the bishops forbade this text, why the names were cut away. To know the root of corruption is to see its fruit in every age, and once seen, it cannot be unseen. Your heart pounds. You close the booklet sharply, as though the sound itself might silence the echoes. But it is too late. The gifts are already alive in your thoughts. You look at your own pen, your own candle, the crucifix at your side, and wonder, which are holy and which are stolen fragments dressed in light? The church bell tolls again, summoning you to vespers. You rise, gathering your robes around you. But as you step into the nave, you notice the windows anew. Scenes you once accepted as sacred now shift under your gaze. The chalices gleam too sharply. The swords in saints' hands seem too deliberate. The painted stars above the Virgin's crown seem almost like constellations charted by forbidden hands. The gifts are here, hidden in plain sight, sanctified by the very church that once condemned them. You steady yourself at the altar, whispering a psalm. Yet beneath the prayer, your mind repeats the margin note. The gifts gleam, but they bite. You close your eyes. For the first time, you wonder if every blessing carries its shadow, if every holy vessel hides an echo of the fall. And as the choir begins, their voices rising like incense, you feel it again, the gnawing awareness that knowledge is never neutral. It is a blade, and you are holding it by the edge. You unlock the iron gate to the crypt with a key that always feels colder than it should, as if it remembers winters you have not lived. The air below is a slow river, damp and mineral, moving past stone columns and forgotten names. Your footsteps measure the silence, heel, toe, echo, as you take the same path acolytes have taken for centuries, past saints known and unknown, past family vaults that once financed the nave above, past slabs that bear a single year, as if a life could be condensed to the date when breath stopped trusting the body. You carry a lantern. Its circle of light floats over carvings smoothed by prayers and time. And for the first time, you notice a pattern in the floor no guidebook mentions. 3 stones, not quite aligned with the rest. 3 stones that form a subtle arc. 3 stones the color of old teeth. You kneel, set the lantern down, and run your fingers over their edges. The mortar is newer here. Not new, but newer. Perhaps a generation, perhaps 2. You press, and the middle stone gives slightly. Not enough to shift, but enough to reply. That is what it feels like. A reply. As though the floor acknowledged your presence and wondered what you would do next. You tell yourself it is maintenance. Settling. The work of a mason who loved symmetry less than he loved speed. Yet a memory pries up from within you, like a weed finding light through cracked pavement. Years ago, during a hard rain, a corner of the nave flooded. Parishioners whispered about the foundations, about the weight of centuries pressing into soil that had not consented. You helped carry buckets, your cassock wet and heavy. And in the chaos, you heard an old groundsman mutter, half to himself, half to the dark water. It's the big ones turning. You laughed then, with a mind that had not yet been visited by names. Big ones. You assumed he meant stones. Now you're not so sure. The lantern sputters. You raise it, and the light skims the ribs of the vaulting overhead, like a hand stroking the belly of a sleeping beast. You move deeper, counting steps in a whisper, an old habit to keep your nerves orderly. Past 12 paces, the wall turns, and there, where the crypt grows narrow, you find a door you have always ignored because it looks like a door no one would trouble. Small, mean, set low, the wood darkened to near black. A padlock hangs from it, open, but rusted shut by time in the very shape of opening, as if the act of unlocking had been performed and then abandoned, leaving the lock to die in the posture of permission. You lower your head to fit, shoulder the door. It refuses, then yields with a sound like fabric tearing underwater. The space beyond is not a room so much as a surrender, the earth accepting a cave into itself. The ceiling lowers. The lantern must be held waist-high to avoid scorching stone. Your breath shuffles sediment. You cough, tasting the ghost of lime, the sad sweetness of rot, the almost metal tang that visits the mouth when fear grows articulate. And then, in the lantern's swing, you see it. Not a bone, not a skull, not a relic in the sense you understand relics. You see an impression, a depression in the hardened soil, visible because damp has darkened it. A silhouette of absence, 5 blunt ovals at the top, a broad pad below, and the faint suggestion of an arch that should not exist if the creature were ordinary. It is a footprint, but not any footprint you have seen in the pageant of human passage. It is too long, too wide, too patient. It looks as if the ground took the weight of a visitor who did not rush, who stood and considered, who allowed the earth time to memorize him. You kneel again, not from reverence, but because your legs require the floor. Your hands hover, disobedient to your training. Touch nothing, the archivists always warned. See, pray, record, but do not touch. You do not obey. The soil is cold, firm, not the crumble you expect. A mason once told you that clay remembers. It takes a shape and keeps it like a vow. You press the tip of your index finger into the depression between 2 of the toe marks and feel the smallest slick of moisture rise, as if something below the surface had exhaled. You withdraw your hand, and for a moment you know, with full, unmediated knowledge, why the Book of Names was chained. The thought is not theological. It is physical. If the watchers lay with daughters of men, then their children would leave traces, not only in bloodlines and legends, not only in violence and vanity, but in the literal earth. And where better for the earth to keep such a confidence than under a church built to deny it? A drip falls somewhere behind you. Then another, to the left. The cave is counting in a code you cannot read. You hold the lantern closer and track a seam in the soil around the impression. It arcs, then straightens, then vanishes, only to reappear on the other side like a cuff around a wrist. A grave? You wonder whether the footprint is not merely a footprint, but a sign above a bed. And the bed is stone and the sleeper is older than any name you dare test. You swallow a prayer. It scratches the throat going down. Lord, if this is delusion, deliver me. If this is truth, protect me. Your voice dies without echo, as if the air refuses to pass your petition along. There are protocols for discoveries beneath consecrated ground. You know them. Inform the diocesan office. Call the historian whose hands smell of vellum and chalk. Summon the careful men who will measure what you have found with rulers and Latin. But you rehearse these steps as if reading a recipe during a fire. You cannot quite see yourself climbing the steps, knocking on the chancery door, announcing calmly that your church sits on a story the church tried to erase, and that the story has learned to breathe through stone. Instead, you sit. Time loosens. Somewhere above you, life continues, unaware. A child will be baptized this afternoon. A bride will try on vows in the mirror of her mind. A widow will choose a candle, light it, and confuse its melting with her grief. Down here, the ground is thick with secrets and very patient. You study the impression's proportions, length, breadth, the odd angle of what must be the metatarsal. You imagine shifting the stones you found earlier, peeling back the grafted floor like a scab. The fantasy disgusts you and speaks to you in the same breath. You remember a passage from a commentary you skimmed in youth, a strange aside quickly dismissed by your instructors, that in some tongues the word for giant overlaps with the word for fallen, and the word for fallen shadows the word for untimely. As if some births arrived out of season, oversized truths delivered into a world unprepared to hold them. You look again at the print. Untimely, yes. As if a future stepped down into a past too small. Heat gathers in your chest. Not courage, not exactly. Not panic either. Something like a decision rehearsing its entrance. You trace the air above the mark with the sign of the cross, and the lantern flame stretches toward your finger like a moth instructed by ritual. I will not speak your name, you whisper to the absence in the earth. I will not preach you. I will not feed you with curiosity. If you are a test, let me pass by. If you are a warning, let me understand without opening. The cave regards you. That is how it feels, that you have been weighed, not by angels, but by soil. You back away, careful not to scuff the edge of the impression, careful not to allow your shadow to fall across it, as if shadows could bruise. At the door, you pause, look once more. For a breath, you think you see a second mark, shallower, half swallowed by time, and you understand why the old groundsman spoke of big ones, plural. The thought arrives with a clarity that shakes you. Perhaps the church was sited here not in ignorance, but in strategy. A weight on a wound, a hymn over a howl, a sanctuary as seal. You shoulder the door closed. The rusted lock clinks like a bad bell. You do not relock it. You cannot bring yourself to fake closure when nothing is settled. Up the steps, the crypt recedes, and you enter the cold health of the nave. Light pours through the stained windows, too bright after earth. Dust becomes a constellation you can steer by for a few seconds. Then the world returns to its old roles. Pews as ribs, altar as heart, priest as voice. You will not tell the altar guild about the loose stones. You will not mention the door to the deacon who counts keys in his sleep. You will lay your hand on the ambo and preach on bread again, blessing, breaking, giving, because men still need to eat, even when the ground under their feet is whispering of giants. But beneath each sentence, you will hear another sentence, older, wider, spoken by clay and kept by time. What is buried is not always gone. What is heavy can still move. And when you lift the chalice, you will feel the floor lift a fraction, as if memory is shifting in its grave to listen. You sit at the back of the chapter hall, where visitors, junior clergy, and inconvenient consciences are placed, while the older men test the weight of words like masons testing stones. The room is long and narrow, its ceiling timbered and dark. The windows are thin slits that admit a light the color of old bone. At the center stands a table laid with parchment, knives, pumice, and bowls of milk lime, the instruments of correction. A council, you were told, a colloquy on orthodoxy and pastoral clarity. But the objects on the table declare a more intimate mission, the art of forgetting. The bishop presiding is a careful man whose voice never rises. He speaks of edification and the health of the faithful, how the poor cannot be expected to carry the burden of disputed texts. Heads nod, quills nod with them, scratching approval into minutes that will endure longer than most men. You are not called to speak. You are called to observe. To observe you learn is often to be implicated. A scholar in black, fingers stained the color of ink bruises, clears his throat. He lists titles like a litany and treats the Apocrypha as a contagion worth quarantining. They breed speculation, he says gently, as if diagnosing a beloved child. Speculation disturbs obedience. Obedience preserves souls. Another lifts a thin codex and shakes it so the clasps jingle. This one whispers of angels who taught cosmetics and blades. It has a scent of fascination, laughter, careful and humorless, visits the table like a chill draft. The presider raises a palm. We do not destroy, he reminds the gathering. We curate. The word is mercy dressed as surgery. A deacon produces a page already scraped. Where text once lived, the vellum gleams like new ice. See, he says, palimpsest. We give the skin back to the gospel, God's economy. No one mentions that the older letters still murmur if you tilt the page toward the candle. You watch a scribe take a knife to another folio. He scrapes in even strokes, gentle, rhythmic, until the forbidden words are a cloud of flecks that drift into the bowl of milk lime. He stirs, the slurry thickens. He dips a brush, paints white over the wound, and sets the leaf aside to dry. The gesture is tender, almost liturgical, a hymn of unwriting. You feel a pull in your chest, revulsion and understanding coiled together. How many times have you, from the pulpit, simplified a parable until its teeth no longer showed? The debate moves to images. A canon lawyer argues that windows can keep their monsters so long as they are properly labeled. Call a giant a sin of excess, he suggests, and a wheel within wheel the mystery of providence. We do not need to delete. We need to rename a young theologian, eager and pale, proposes marginal glosses in the catechism. Note that certain ancient stories are poetical, not historical. An older priest murmurs, poetry builds nations, history breaks them, and everyone pretends not to hear. When the name Enoch crosses the air, the room changes temperature. Some faces harden, some look briefly kind. The presider sighs as if the word itself had weight. We are not banning, he says. We are shelving. To the archives, then, where chains are gentler than bonfires and locks make less smoke. A librarian in gray catalogs the procedure. Who may consult and under what eyes? Which passages must be copied only by hands that have made retreat and confession? How a note of warning must precede any excerpt like a sentry preceding a caravan. A courier enters with a folded sheet. A letter from another diocese. Their cathedral floor unsettled during repairs. The contractor found anomalies. You go cold. The bishop reads without looking up. Not our concern, he says, and sets the letter beneath a stack where paper goes to learn endurance. You think of the footprint in the cave, the arc of damp soil, the lock rusted open in the posture of permission. The council is right about one thing. Speculation disturbs obedience. But perhaps obedience without truth is only a tidy arrangement of fear. The knives keep moving. Scrape, dust, smooth, rewrite. You think of the oath on the mountain, how it bound the watchers to desire, how their gifts used the human urge to beautify, to heal, to measure, as the doorway for corruption. And you see, unbidden, unwelcome, the council's craft is a mirror of that ancient night. Not rebellion, but covenant, made in good intentions, binding the church to curated silence. The paradox hisses. In protecting souls, they may be tutoring ignorance. In trimming thorns, they may be amputating scent. At recess, you find yourself in the scriptorium, where windows are low and the dust is educated. A monk? No. A brother of the pen, not of your order, works with pumice on a stubborn line. You watch him for a beat too long. He glances up. You can still read it if you warm the leaf, he says softly, as if admitting to a vice. The oils in the skin call the strokes back. Briefly, he gestures toward a lamp. You do not move. You realize that what you fear is not the letters, but your own eagerness. Back in the hall, resolutions are drafted. A polite index with a polite preface, designed to sound like a lullaby. For the edification of the faithful and the quiet of hearts. The bishop asks whether any voice remains unheard. Silence answers, dutiful and dense. Silence is good at councils. It counts as agreement. You sign where you are told, your name a black fish swimming among other black fish, downstream toward a decree. Then, as minutes are sanded and bound, a small thing happens. A scrap falls from the table. An unintended shaving of words, curled like a fingernail. It lands near your shoe, face down. No one notices. You bend, flip it with a finger. A half-name looks up at you through chalky dust. Jaza. The rest is scraped away. Something inside you recognizes the fragment and the way a bell recognizes a storm. You close your hand around it until it softens with your heat. Then lay it back among the drift as if it chose to fall there on its own. When the council disperses, the corridors are a wind tunnel of whispered justifications. We keep the little ones from drowning in the deep end. We cannot build doctrine on bruised reeds. A shepherd must carry, not confuse. None of it is false. All of it is partial. You move through the arguments like a man brushing past veils. Each veil offers softness, and each veil hides the door. Somewhere behind the veils is the footprint in the earth, the chain on a book, the rust that opened and then froze, the oath that still breathes. That night you cannot sleep. You light a candle and lay out the tools the council used, knife, pumice, bowl of milk lime, as if to rehearse their logic until it becomes yours. But another set of instruments insists on the table. A rosary, a psalter, and the booklet of names. Between these two liturgies, erasure and remembrance, you are asked to choose a posture. You select neither. You kneel. You do not open the booklet. You do not scrape a page. You pray for the church with a love that aches. Guard us from zeal that starves truth. Guard us from truth that starves love. Teach us when to speak secrets and when to carry them like crosses. The candle burns low. In its last inch of life, the flame grows extravagant, throws the room's bones onto the walls. For a heartbeat, the shadows look like high, many-eyed forms and the long stride of something that once walked through wet earth. Then the wick gutters, and the creatures return to being furniture and fear. You breathe. In the darkness, the council's phrases line up in your mind like the early beads of a new rosary. You will speak them to your flock, because safety is also a kind of bread. But you will not forget what you saw mixed into milk. Words turn to paste, spread thin to paint over an absence that still hums beneath the white. You remember the presider's gentlest sentence. We are not destroying, we are curating. And you decide that the curation must include a witness. If the church shelves Enoch, then let a priest at least remember which shelf. If the floors are sealed, let a priest at least keep the key from rusting into theater. You will keep records in a hand so small that only the penitent and the persistent could read them. You will preach mercy and hear confessions and feed the living. And you will carry quietly the names no sermon may host, not as weapons, but as warnings. Outside, the bells begin their first call. The parish will wake. You rise, smooth your cassock, and set the knife, the pumice, the bowl away. You keep the rosary. You keep the psalter. You keep the booklet. You open the door, and the corridor receives you the way a river receives a stone. With patience, with the knowledge that even in motion, some truths prefer the riverbed. The archives are a ladder more than a room. You descend rung by rung, the iron cold beneath your hands, each step a heartbeat further from sunlight. The air thickens, heavy with the musk of parchment, wax, and centuries of human breath sealed into stone. At the bottom, the chamber spreads wide, lined with chained tomes that sway slightly when you pass, as though acknowledging your trespass. You feel less like a visitor than an intruder. The booklet of names in your pocket seems to warm against your ribs, guiding you to the shelf reserved for texts neither blessed nor damned. Texts suspended in purgatory. You find the chain you sought, thick, blackened, coiled around a volume too large for comfort. Its cover is leather, cracked like old skin, with no title except a fading sigil pressed into its center. You brush your thumb across it and feel the ghost of a pattern. Circles within circles, intersecting lines that refuse to stay still. Enoch. The key rattles in your hand. You hesitate. To unchain this book is to cross another line, one the council above would never forgive. Yet curiosity has grown teeth. It gnaws at your resolve. You unlock the clasp. The sound is indecently loud, a church bell struck underground. The chain slithers free, heavy links clattering like bones shaken awake. You wince, half expecting footsteps behind you, but none come. The pages resist at first, stiff with age, then yield, releasing a breath of dust and musk. Margins are crowded with notes, scribbles from priests who dared to read and yet feared to write in clarity. Some words are smudged as though erased by trembling hands, others underlined twice with urgent ink. The text itself is raw, uncompromising. Angels descending not in glory, but in hunger. Men taught charms, women adorned with paints and metals. Children born of unions that cracked the earth with their sighs. You run your finger along a passage, whispering aloud without realizing. They swore an oath, binding themselves together by curses, and they descended upon Ardis, the summit of the mountain. The sound of your own voice startles you. It carries strangely in the chamber, as if the stone prefers these words to psalms. In the margin beside this line, a prior hand has written, "Never preach this, only remember." Another note in a different hand argues back. To forget is to invite repetition. You press your palm to the page. Both notes feel true. Both feel impossible. You turn another leaf. There, an illustration, crude but unmistakable. Figures with wings clipped short, their heads bowed not in worship but in shame. Around them stand women crowned in stars and metal, and beneath them, beings too tall for the frame, their heads grazing the top of the page as if even parchment could barely contain them. You stare until the ink seems to pulse. The artist did not mean ornament. He meant testimony. Your breath comes shallow. You close the book, but the images do not close. They remain imprinted in your mind, luminous against the dark. You realize that you are not the first priest to feel this, nor the last. The chain was not only to protect the church from the book, but to protect the book from priests who might bleed its secrets into the world. You glance around. The other volumes sit quiet, but you cannot shake the sense that they lean closer. Jealous, waiting for their turn to speak, you whisper, "Not tonight." The words fall flat. Silence resumes its dominion. You replace the chain. You do not relock it. Something in you balks at finality. Instead, you fold the clasp as if pretending closure, a mimicry of obedience. Then you climb the ladder, lantern swaying, the weight of the book's revelations heavier than the iron links you left behind. Back in your quarters, you kneel by your bed. The prayer that escapes you is not polished, not liturgical. It is raw. Lord, if you hid these truths, teach me why. If you allowed them to survive, teach me how the room listens, but offers no reply. Perhaps the silence is itself an answer, but you're not ready to understand it. When sleep finally comes, it does not bring rest. It brings the mountain, tall, shadowed, crowned with fire. At its summit stand 200 figures, hand in hand, their eyes fixed downward. And you, a priest bound to both heaven and earth, feel the ground tremble under the weight of their oath. Morning light turns the nave into a sea of colored breath. You have walked this aisle thousands of times, crossed yourself before these windows as a sailor salutes the constellations he trusts to carry him home. Today the glass looks back. The blues are colder, the reds nearer to blood than wine. The golds less like halos and more like signals pitched to eyes that have learned a new alphabet. You lift your gaze and feel the old benign stories shifting under your feet like sand. The north transept holds your favorite panel. Had held, until this morning, made favorites suspect. It charts Ezekiel's vision, the wheel within the wheel, eyes in the rims, creatures with wings whose count is more than comfort allows. As a young priest, you would stand here after Compline, letting the geometry quiet the noise in your head. Now the same geometry feels like a map someone folded wrong on purpose. The spokes align with thin lead seams in a way you never noticed, pointing not to the prophet's face, but to a corner vignette easily overlooked. A shepherd's staff beside a print too large to belong to any flock animal drawn elsewhere on the pane. The docent once called it a decorative flourish. Today it reads as a signature. Who signed it? Not the artist. The artist served two masters, the bishop who paid him and the story he smuggled. You move to the next bay, the Annunciation. Gabriel's lily leans toward Mary, pure lines, simple virtue. But the background, long a blur you refuse to focus on, resolves into a scatter of stars that are not indifferent dots. They are placed. 3 make a belt. 1 sits where no star should be if the scene were only piety. You trace them with your finger in the air, cautious not to touch the glass. Orion, almost. A correction, a nudge. The old booklet's margin returns to mind. The gifts gleam, but they bite. And you understand with a cold clarity that the window teaches by camouflage. Children see obedience. Initiates, if any still exist, see the wheel's grammar and a sky rewritten to whisper of tutelage from above that bent downward too far. A woman kneels 2 pews behind you, hands knit, eyes closed. You listen for the prayer in her breath. Petition, thanksgiving, fear. But hear only the sound of glass settling against lead as the building warms for the day. Even the windows have a temperature. Even the windows carry fatigue. You step sideways toward a panel most parishioners ignore because its colors are muddy and the saint obscure. Barlam? Joasaph? The label has been touched up so many times, its letters wobble. You peer past the saint's face to the border, where vines twine among tiny medallions. In 3 of these medallions, barely the size of a thumbnail, Giants kneeled to be measured by styluses held in delicate hands. The proportions misbehave. The styluses bend as if the parchment, not the giant, were resisting. You swallow, throat dry. This is not illustration. It is arithmetic disguised as devotion. You walk slower now, as if the floor were ice. The nave's length becomes a scroll you unroll at peril. A window with the magi, one kneeling, one offering, one pointing. You have preached their gifts for years, gold, frankincense, myrrh. But the caskets in glass are wrong. The clasp on one is iron, hammered into a pattern you recognize from a margin drawing in Enoch's chained volume. The smith's knot of Azazel. Another casket lid carries sigils too angular for pious ornament. To the untrained, they are flourish. To your newly enlisted fear, they are letters. The knowledge to make a blade can hide in a hinge. Your heart thumps so loudly, you look around to see if anyone hears. 2 altar guild women fuss with linens near the sanctuary, pursed mouths and soft authority. They do not glance up. The choir loft creaks as a boy retrieves misplaced sheet music. The ordinary remains ordinary. Only you are altered. You drift beneath the rose window like a penitent beneath an eye. The rose is a theology of circles. Christ in the center, apostles ringed around him, prophets on the petals, ancestors along the rim. You have always loved the discipline. Today the discipline feels like a veil so expertly woven, its beauty distracts from the fact of its hiding. In 2 opposite petals, the artisan has set tiny discs of red glass veined with darker red, so dark they read black from the floor. Up close, too close, the verger would say, you see that the darker veins are not defects but lines. A mountain, a ring of figures, a short inscription in an alphabet the church does not teach but which your mind, having gazed into the chained book, recognizes enough to flinch from. The discs are almost invisible from the nave. From the triforium they would be easier. From the outside near the gutter, easiest of all. The message is meant for those who climb. You climb. The stair in the transept turret is mean and cramped. The treads worn to scoops by monks who once chose stairs over sleep. You ascend into breathless air, palms skimming stone damp as a cellar. At the gallery level, the church rearranges itself. Roofs appear where floors once were. Windows that scolded now confide. Dust motes swarm like a private congregation. You edge along the narrow walk until the rose's iron spine hums through the stone under your feet. Up close, the glass is not mystical. It is solder and patience. Cuts meant, cuts regretted. But nearness does not banish the hidden. It reveals the artist's shorthands, the way a hand loosened when drawing eyes on wings, as though that pattern were muscle memory. The way lines tightened for ordinary halos, as if ordinary holiness strained his wrist. You lean and find the 2 red discs again. They are unmistakable. Tiny mountains ringed with tiny figures. An oath at scale, seed small and harvest large. Between them, barely a stroke, a figure descending, not floating, descending. Your fingers curl on the iron. The gallery's timber groans a benign warning. You whisper, I see you. You do not know to whom you speak, angel, artisan, idea. But the confession steadies you. You are not inventing. Someone put this here for someone to notice. When time ripened, notice into duty. Farther along the gallery, a lancet window glows with a scene of a woman grinding powders, mortar and pestle rendered with devastating charm. The label names her a saint known for healing. In the painted mortar, tiny flecks of color have been trapped. Mica? Gilding? So that when the sun strikes, the powder seems to live, bright and treacherous. Lower in the same light, a man at a forge raises a hammer. In the reflection, it looks almost like a blessing. In the corner, a child reaches for a constellation printed on a scrap. Cosmos and Damien, a black letter note says. But beside the note, in a red, barely darker than the field, a second hand has scribbled an old caution. Cave Dona. Beware the gifts. You sit on the cold sill and let your legs ache. The view through the lattice down into the nave is both exalted and lonely. This is where keepers stand, not above because they are better, but because the view they are given will not fit in the pews. You remember the council below and the knives making palimpsests. You feel a soft, disobedient gratitude for the unknown glaziers who chose to write in color what the scribes scraped from vellum. The church curated. The windows remembered. The thought lands with a clarity bordering on joy. Curation is not only erasure, it is also redistribution. If a name is too heavy for the ear, fix it in glass where it becomes light. If a story cannot be preached, embed its grammar in geometry where the sun can preach it without words. The sanctuary is not only a seal, it is a cipher, and with the joy, its shadow. Ciphers invite readers. If you can read, others can. If others can, some will read badly. Some will take the wheel and build a chariot that runs over the poor. Some will take the star chart and draft destinies to sell. Some will grind the powders not for beauty, but for bewitching. The old gifts still glitter behind the panes. The warning in red, Cave Dona, is a last-ditch catechism in a pigment that will outlive you. You stand, joints protesting, and make your way back to the stair. Before descending, you press your forehead lightly to the stone mullion. It is warm where the sun touches it, cool where the window meets shade. In that temperature gradient, you hear a theology. The church has always been half light, half shelter, never all one or the other without danger. You whisper a priest's vow shaped into a new key. Let me be window, not wall. Cipher, not silence. Down in the nave, the world resumes its modest errands. A broom skates, a cough blooms and dies. A door agrees to close. You pause beneath the Ezekiel panel one last time, letting the eyes on wheels regard you. They seem less monstrous now, more like sentries who have waited so long they learn to look patient. You nod, foolish perhaps, but honest. And the movement dislodges a memory. A catechism answer you memorized as a novice about sacramentals. How they do not cause grace, but dispose us to receive it. The windows, you realize, are sacramentals of memory. They do not cause truth. They dispose you to endure it. When you step back into the aisle, the woman who had been praying rises. She catches your eye, hesitant. "Father," she says, "I dreamed last night of a wheel full of eyes, and I woke calm, not afraid. Is that foolish?" You open your mouth to deliver the comfortable line about dreams and digestion. You do not. "No," you say, "not foolish. Some things look frightening because they are keeping watch." Her shoulders unclench. She smiles the small smile of the consult and leaves a coin at Saint Joseph's foot. You watch the coin spin to stillness and think of iron rings and red discs and the forged hinge shaped like a knot that knows too much. You will preach on trust this week. You will not say Enoch. You will not say Semjaza. You will speak of a God who writes warnings into light and hides mercy in margins. And above the homily, above the heads of those who come to eat what you offer, the windows will continue their patient labor, telling the story you are not allowed to tell, in a tongue the sun can read. The rectory grows quieter after nightfall, yet your study feels anything but safe. The shadows climb higher on the walls, as if they've learned ambition from the stained glass. You sit at the desk, where your sermon drafts should lie. But the paper before you is empty, your pen idle. The confessional whispers still linger in your ears, mingling with the half-read lines of Enoch and the silent sermons of the windows. You want peace, yet what you have is weight. A knock at the door breaks the stillness. It is not a parishioner. No parishioner comes this late. You open it to find Father Matthias, the oldest priest in your diocese, his cloak damp from the night. His face carries lines etched by decades of confessions, each wrinkle another soul's burden pressed into him. He steps in without waiting for invitation, as if the matter that brings him admits no ceremony. He sets down a worn satchel, its leather shiny with age, its buckles dented like teeth. You've seen it, he says without preamble. His voice is weary, not accusatory. He does not ask what, only that one word, and in it is an entire library. Your throat dries. You close the door, bolt it, and light another candle. How do you know? He shrugs, a gesture of someone past fear. I saw it once too. Long ago. Younger than you are now. And once is enough. He does not specify whether he means the chained book, the footprint in the crypt, or the messages in glass. You realize with a slow dread that it does not matter. All roads lead to the same precipice. He sits heavily, drawing out a small vial wrapped in cloth. The glass is stained, cloudy with age. Inside is dust, fine as flour, gray as ash. He turns it slowly between his fingers. This is what happens when names are spoken aloud too often, he murmurs. The demonologists think power is in the voice. But it isn't. Power is in attention. The moment a priest begins to study them, to name them, to list and catalog, he makes a bargain without knowing. You lean forward, whispering, "A bargain?" Father Matthias nods. Every exorcist learns it. To name is to bind, yes, but binding cuts both ways. Speak the name and the name notices you. Repeat it, and it learns you like a shepherd learns his flock. One day you think you command it. The next you find yourself explaining to a bishop why your prayers sound less like deliverance and more like hunger. Your hands tighten around the arms of your chair. But if we refuse the names, how do we protect the flock? He looks at you with eyes half blind, half burning. We protect them by discernment, not by vocabulary. By warning them of shadows without sketching the shape of the monster. A serpent described too carefully becomes a serpent invoked. You remember the list of names scrawled in your hidden booklet, each one pressing on your mind like stones in a pocket. You remember the whispered semjaza, the dust taste in your mouth, the rusted lock yawning open. You remember, and you realize, you have already been noticed. Father Matthias pushes the vial toward you. This dust, from the margin of a leaf scraped one time too many. A brother thought he could erase Azazel's name completely. He scraped, rewrote, scraped again, until the parchment gave way. The dust was gathered, and in the nights after, he said he heard hammering in the walls, hammering like a forge. They sent him away before he could finish his report. You stare at the vial, its powder shifting faintly as if stirred by breath though one exhaled. You feel the weight of unseen choices pressing down, to bury knowledge under silence, or to risk naming and be named. Matthias leans close. His voice lowers to almost nothing. You think you're alone in this. You're not. Some of us carry the burden, so the rest may never know. We're archivists of shadows, priests who tend to silence the way others tend to relics. We call ourselves demonologists, but truthfully, we are custodians of unspoken words. Your pulse quickens. And what happens to us? A pause, a sigh. Most fade. Some are consumed, Few survive long enough to warn another, as I warn you now. That is our bargain. The names keep us, so long as we keep them locked. The candle sputters, throwing shadows that look too much like wings bent in shame. You feel caught between confession and conspiracy, between the chalice of salvation and the goblet of poison. You ask, voice hoarse, "And if I refuse this burden?" Matthias closes your hand around the vial. "Then you will still carry it. The only question is whether you carry it knowingly." The silence after stretches, thick and oppressive. You want to pray, but no words rise. You want to scream, but your throat burns shut. Instead, you hear faintly, almost beneath hearing, the echo of a hammer striking metal. Dull, steady, patient. The sound may be memory, or it may be the gift of Azazel, still alive in the dust you hold. You blow out the candle. Darkness swallows the room, but the vial glimmers faintly in your hand, as though dust remembers fire. She arrives with dusk stitched into her veil and perfume that smells like gardens that never rot. You know her by reputation long before you know her by face. A noble woman whose charities are as public as her husband's debts, whose portraits in the town hall seem to grow younger as the years advance. She kneels not at the confessional, but at the prie-dieu in your study, the place reserved for counsels too brittle for the booth. Her hands are ungloved. The candle snags light on a ring that drinks it greedily. "Father," she says, and her voice is trained, each syllable a note that knows its shelf. "I come not to display sorrow, but to purchase clarity." You say gently, "Clarity is not for sale." She smiles, as if she has heard that line before, and filed it among quaint sayings that do not govern her. "I am to be married again," she continues. You recall the funerals, the veils, the rumor that grief becomes her like velvet. "My betrothed is admired. Men praise his judgment, women praise other things. It is useful for a household to be admired." She pauses, studying the smoke of your candle as if it carries a grammar she alone reads. "I must be useful." You wait. The air in the room tightens, a corset laced by the unsaid. "Years ago," she says finally, "an aunt gave me a book." It was not a book, really. More a ledger of receipts, powders, oils, tinctures. Names for colors that only exist when you grind them fine enough. Instructions for compacts and elixirs, for mourning and for marriage. I was a plain girl then, earnest in the dangerous way earnest girls are. I wanted to be seen, to be unavoidable. Her laugh is quiet, contempt without malice. I became unavoidable. You know this story's shape before she completes it. Cosmos and Damian in the lancet window, mortar shining with mica. The ink note, cave dona. Beware the gifts. You think of Penamew's writing of charms, of Azazel's metals hammered into hinges and clasps, as if doors themselves could become arguments. You think of the chain on Enoch, the book's breath, the oath on the mountain. It arrives within you like liturgy. The old gifts still glitter. "In the ledger," she says, "were notes in a second hand, older, nervous. Warnings disguised as compliments, compliments that hid contempt. But between the lines, recipes were copied and improved. I learned the way a woman learns, by watching, by guessing, by bleeding discreetly when the mix goes wrong. I learned how to wake the skin, to coax light where nature forgot it, to cool the heat that betrays fatigue. I learned which earths become gold when you lie to them long enough in the bowl. I learned to move through a room like a rumor she looks up, and for an instant the candle's tremble reveals a flicker beneath her face. as if a second mask slides behind the first, a version of her that is neither alive nor painted but practiced. Your mouth tastes of iron. In your pocket, the tiny vial Father Matthias pressed into your palm becomes heavy, as if powdered caution tries to anchor you to the floor. The ledger continued, she says, beyond the face. How to calm a man, how to unman him, how to lend charisma to a voice that shakes, how to banish the smell of fear, how to perfume an accusation so that it smells like concern. This is knowledge, Father, and knowledge must be stewarded. She has not come to repent. She has come to measure you. You answer carefully. Some knowledge sickens the steward. A tilt of the head, curious, not insulted. Is that what you think? That the steward is sick? You recall the council's knives scraping vellum, the crypt's impression, the air's decision to withhold echo, the windows singing in red, where only climbers rid. You recall your own mouth shaping a name silently, and the candle leaning, attentive. You think of attention as power, of naming as mutual binding. You choose your words as if placing knives back into their sleeves. I think, you say, that beauty is a sacramental when it draws love toward God, and a sorcery when it draws love toward itself. I think power is a medicine only when it is poured out. And if it is poured out on the wrong ground, she asks, what do you call the physician who throws wine into sand? A sinner, you say, but not for the wine. The corner of her mouth moves. Approval or pity, you cannot tell. Husband the second was cruel, she says softly. He taught me the science of shadows, how a bruise wears a dress. The ledger helped more than prayer. Pray how you like. The powder stopped questions at the door. She dips 2 fingers into the small box she has brought, lifts them out dusted with a faint shimmer, and holds them near the candle. The particles catch the light and throw it back in tiny, disciplined rebellions. This, she says, and a sister who would not betray me, saved my life. You swallow the pastoral responses that gather at your lips like gulls. She has climbed where the sun reads red discs. She has learned a grammar you now recognize. The gifts gleam, the gifts bite. What do you want from me? You ask. Absolution would be pleasant, she says. Instruction, more honest. She leans forward, and the perfume of gardens crowds the room until prayer cannot breathe. Tell me, Father, does the Church forbid all arts that make a woman beautiful, or only the ones that work? The question is a blade. It seeks your heart at an angle. You do not flinch. The Church forbids no grace. She forbids the worship of what is not God. And if a face is worshipped, she returns, then it is an idol. Whether painted or not, silence. The clock's small mechanics tick like insect feet. At last, she says, the ledger has sections that do not concern the face. They concern other appetites. Wealth, favor, the patience of creditors, the sleep of rivals, the softening of officials. She looks at your crucifix, and for a moment her expression is not contempt, not reverence, but assessment. They also work. You choose the blunt line. You are asking me to bless a practice that traffics in coercion. She does not blink. I am asking whether the fallen gave these recipes, or whether women, left without swords, learned their own metallurgy. The line lands in you like a confession you were not prepared to hold. You see, all at once, how conveniently the story of blame can be draped over a woman's craft to excuse men's fears. You also see how easily craft can become domination by other means. Competing truths press on the ribs of a single chest. You speak slowly, because words are volatile near flame. What I will say, you begin, is this: some knowledge arrives by theft, some by patience, some by prayer, some by predation. The ledger you speak of bears a smell I recognize. It smells like the mountain where vows went wrong. That does not mean every powder in your bowl is an oath to darkness. It means each use is a vow renewed. What you vow the powder to, what you vow yourself to, decides the master. She listens, and for the first time, her composure loosens. A shadow of something nearly like relief grazes her face. You continue. If what you do guards life from cruelty, if it tells the truth about suffering, if it shelters the weak without enthralling the strong, then you are a steward bruised but not enslaved. If what you do manipulates appetite, blinds judgment, purchases consent, then you have married an art the watchers taught to make slaves look like queens. A pulse trembles in the skin at her throat. She closes the box. And if I do not know which vow I make when the mortar sings, then you must stop until you do, you say, the words tasting harsher than you wished. Because ignorance is an altar, and you may be sacrificing yourself on it. Her eyes shine, not with tears, not yet, but with the wetness of a surface deciding whether to hold. She takes the ring from her finger, sets it on the desk with a sound like a small gate closing. I will bring the ledger, she says. You will see it, and you will tell me whether the margins sigh with chains. A beat. And if they do, then we will bury it, you say, and the image that arrives, the crypt, the ark of damp earth, makes your stomach lean. We will bury it in a way that remembers where. She laughs once, not unkind. You speak like a man who has already dug a few forbidden holes. You do not answer. She rises. The veil falls back into place. For a moment, in the crossing light, you think you see giants kneeling to be measured. A forge hammer lifting in benediction, a red disc turning in a rose. Then the moment breaks. She's only a woman in a room with a priest, and the candle is simply a candle. At the door, she pauses. Father, if I am beautiful by theft, can God still look at me? You find the truest line you have. He looked at Peter after the theft of his courage, you say, and loved him more than before, because love is not fooled by cosmetics or by fear. She nods once, very small, as if not to startle Grace. The door closes. You sit alone with the ring and the faint, stubborn perfume of gardens that never rot. You open a window to let night in, and it arrives like a cool hand on a fevered brow. Somewhere, a hammer sounds, dull, steady. Somewhere else, a choir of glass hums warnings in red. On your desk, the vial of dust gleams faintly, remembering fire. You take up your pen at last and write a line you did not expect. Some gifts are not to be refused, but to be baptized. Some are not to be baptized, but to be buried. Wisdom is knowing which is which. You sand the ink, it dries. You whisper a blessing over the empty air, a blessing for a bride who suspects her beauty is a bargain and longs to renegotiate. Night pours over the rectory like ink, and you step outside to let it write on you. The village is a scatter of lamplight and the soft industry of crickets. Above, the sky is a vault that has forgotten how to fall. You carry no lantern. The dark teaches other senses. Your feet learn the path by memory. The round stones that betray ankles, the dip where rain gathers, the moss that sighs undercloth soft. You cross the churchyard to the little garden where the sundial keeps the hours, sunlight refuses to print on bells. Here, the stars are less story and more instrument. Needles pricking cloth stretch tight on eternity's frame. You tilt your head until the nave's bulk no longer blocks the heavens. The familiar constellations present themselves with the easy arrogance of old rulers. 3 in a row, a belt, a hook for a shepherd, a crown that is too perfect to have grown there. You remember the panel where Gabriel's lily lives against a sky that was almost Orion, then corrected by a hand with opinions. You remember the margin ink, Cave Dona, beware the gifts, and you remember the sentence you wrote after the noblewoman left. Some gifts must be baptized, some buried, wisdom the difference. You measure with your fingers an angle between 2 stars the old farmer swore signaled weather, and a quiet dread settles in you that is not about storms. The dread is this, that the sky has been misread for so long by men with good intentions that it has become a lie we all politely agree to believe. Not because its lights are false, but because its grammar has been bent, reframed as map when perhaps it is prison, or as hymn when perhaps it is warning. You speak into the quiet, because priests are trained to translate silence even when it declines to be translated. If the watchers were cast down, others were locked up, you say, surprising yourself with the calm of it. The thought had grazed you before, now it stands. The fathers taught that stars are signs and seasons, clocks that print God's timetable on night. But if the fallen taught star lore, and men learned to sell destinies from those lessons, then perhaps heaven's chart is less a gift than a gate. You picture iron lines drawn across the firmament, long bars curved into circles, wheels within wheels, gilded, yes, holy in Isaiah's mouth and John's, yet also carceral, a system as beautiful as it is binding. A memory from the archives, prize loose, a note in brown ink beside a meteor passage. Some fall and burn because they are allowed to. The permitted falling that reminds the prisoners what awaits beyond their bars. You had skimmed it. Now it itches. You walk to the cemetery fence and lean your elbows on its cool iron. A stone circle on a hill beyond the village cuts the horizon like the teeth of a broken crown. Old men in the tavern claim it counts solstices. Children claim giants once played ring games there until God scolded the earth into stillness. As a novice, you learn to smile at such talk and return to catechisms that hold water. Tonight you do not smile. You wonder whether men who raised stones to follow sun and moon were not pagans so much as wardens, cooperating, however clumsily, with a containment the heavens themselves began. You whisper the prayer for humility. Deliver me from lights that do not warm, and wait for its medicine to wash your head. It does not. Not yet. Instead, a new thought arrives uninvited. If the sky is a cage for some of what fell, then the church calendar, its constellations of feasts, fasts, vigil lamps, processions by the moon's sobriety, may be less a schedule than a choreography that keeps watch. We mark Advent and Easter not only to remember, but to patrol. Bells ring not only to summon, but to disrupt rhythms that cages prefer. You think of matins when no one comes. You think of compline when no one stays. You think of how the windows sing warning in red to anyone who climbs. Perhaps liturgy is how earth answers the bars above. A shape separates from the dark by the gate. A figure moving without hurry. For an instant you feel the cobweb thrill of being found in a thought you meant to think alone. But it is only the town astronomer, the one who brings his brass-tubed affairs to sell glimpses of planets to men who buy bread by weight. He recognizes you and offers a shy nod. Father? Seeing anything worth telling? He asks. You almost say, prisoners? But he would hear a metaphor and see only heroes trapped by superstition. The usual, you say instead. A belt, a shepherd's hook, a crown. He chuckles. And this year the planets are badly behaved. Mars has learned vanity again. Refuses to stay put. He angles his tube toward an open patch. Look, if you like. You hesitate, then put your eye to the cold brass. The disk swims, steadies, shines. A planet plainly, freckled and indifferent. The man taps the tube. Some claim they can read fortunes in this. Nonsense. Though I confess the nonsense pays. People want the sky to notice them. They don't much like a heaven that keeps its own counsel. He lowers the instrument, regards you with a candor that feels like blessing. You've changed, Father. Your sermons are quieter, but they carry more weight. He searches for a gentle word that won't be gossip. Gravity. You laugh softly. Perhaps gravity is catching. He nods to the vault. It always has been. Good night, Father. When he goes, the path swallows him without malice. You return your gaze to the constellations. Gravity. Old men gave the forced names decades after stones and apples and bones knew it by bruise. The watchers gave names to star lore long after heaven knew the bars by function. And the church gave names to devotions long after love learned its way around compulsion. Names again, always names. You feel the vial in your pocket and do not touch it. An owl trades branches above you with a sound like a sleeve brushed by candle flame. You think of Father Matthias and bargains made by attention. You think of the noblewoman's ledger and the vow every use renews. You think of curation as erasure and as redistribution. You think of your decision to remember where you bury. All of it collects into a rough sentence that insists, sometimes the mercy is not in opening cages, but in not rattling them. Your eyes drift to the roofline. The belfry is a dark tooth against the scatter of stars. You have wound that bell's rope 1,000 times into your palm, felt its burn, tasted its iron in the mouth of your hand. You always thought you were interrupting sleep. Perhaps you were interrupting something else, reminding what sits above that the earth is not passive. You imagine, with a reverence that does not know how to justify itself to doctrine, that parish bells irritate certain listeners who cannot bear rhythm not their own. You cross yourself, not against the sky, but under it, like a man sheltering beneath a bridge in rain that is old enough to be memory. If you permit prisoners above us, you pray, teach us to keep faithful hours below. If you hide bars in beauty, teach us to read beauty without courting wardens. If you allow lights that do not warm, teach us to look without catching fire. A breeze runs its fingers through the yew hedge. Somewhere, a fox decides tonight is not the night to test the chicken coop. Somewhere, a mother stands up from a child's bed and learns again that sleep is a sacrament she cannot buy. You are not alone in your watch, you realize. The parish keeps its rotas. The sick who count breaths at night, the lonely who count cracks, the lovers who count heartbeats. Their vigilance, added to your own, is a net. Nets are bars inverted. Maybe you are all, unknowingly, part of a weave that protects. You turn to go, then stop. Above the rose window's peak, a faint smear of light stirs, the Milky Way finding its old road now that the town's lamps have dozed. Between two brighter stars, a lesser one twitches, not by defiance, but because air wobbles. Yet the twitch reads like the blink of an eye punished into keeping watch too long. Compassion surprises you. Rest, you tell the sky, feeling foolish and kind. We are awake for a little while yet. Back inside, the hall smells of beeswax and books. You sit at your desk, the ledger of the day open to its small squares. In one you write, prisoners above, keepers below, bells as patrol. In another, Do not teach the shape of cages to those who would make keys. You add a third. If some gifts must be baptized, then some hours must be too. You pencil a ring around matins, then around the dawn mass. You will keep them like appointments with an unnamed patient who lives overhead. Before sleep, you open the window to let star cold in. The chill nets your face. Your breath ghosts the glass. Across the room, the vial's dust picks up the little light that enters, and for a second it looks like a small galaxy confined to glass. The image is too convenient to trust. You close the shutters and cross to the bed. On your knees, you offer the prayer the church taught when Christians lived under emperors and needed to hide names and symbols. Lighten our darkness. We beseech thee, O Lord. The old words vibrate like a chord plucked on a deep string. You lie down, awake and willing to be taught by sleep. Just as the first wave lifts you, you hear a sound outside that is not animal. A single, distant ring of iron on iron, not from a forge, but from high, thin air. If there are prisoners, they have moved. If there are keepers, they will keep. You do not rise to investigate. You put your hand over your heart and count beats until counting becomes prayer. The chancery corridors smell of ink and wool, a perfume of bureaucracy that hides its sharpness until you breathe too long. You sit in a chamber lined with books whose spines are more polished by dust than by hands. Today the air is restless with paper. The printing press has begun to breed in the city, they say, turning single whispers into swarms. You hear it in the nervous cadence of the officials gathered. The fear that secrets which once took years to copy now sprint from page to page, multiplying like rumor itself. On the table lies a volume you recognize. Too young to be manuscript, too bold to be safe. Enoch again, but this time in black letters, crisp and sure, not chained, but multiplied. The type bites into the page with a confidence ink alone should not have. You feel it in your stomach, the difference between a single candle in a crypt and a forest set alight. The inquisitor present is a lean man, with eyes the color of metal filings. He speaks in clipped syllables, every phrase like a nail hammered into the wood of policy. We are not debating authenticity, he says. We are debating appetite. The people hunger. If we do not feed them bread, they will swallow stones. Another cleric counters, a stone is not bread, but if it looks enough like bread, who will know until teeth break? The inquisitor spreads his hands. Then we must seize the stones. His gaze moves over the room, measuring each priest like merchandise. When it pauses on you, you know without being told that he recognizes something in your face, the look of one who has already tasted the forbidden. You lower your eyes, but he smiles faintly, satisfied. The debate lengthens. Some argue for controlled circulation, for guarded libraries with keys as sacraments. Others argue for fire, for ash as the only cure for infection. The printing press makes both strategies seem like sandbags against a flood. The phrase dangerous knowledge repeats until it loses meaning, until it sounds like the hollow echo of its own fear. A young deacon, pale from long nights with scholars, lifts his hand. What if we read it publicly, he ventures, only to refute it? What if we let its pages breathe so the faithful may see their poison for themselves? The inquisitor's eyes sharpen. Have you never heard of venom used as perfume? A thing can kill by its scent long before it touches the skin. To read aloud is to pronounce. To pronounce is to bind. You recall Father Matthias and his vial of dust. You recall the noble woman with her powders, the shimmer that turned candlelight into chains. You feel the echo in the inquisitor's warning, but without mercy, stripped down to iron law. Then comes the question you feared. Who here has read it? A silence swells. It is the kind of silence that breeds guilt, true or not. One or two admit it cautiously, framing it as duty. When the Inquisitor's gaze slides to you again, your breath catches. You could lie. You could be silent. Instead, you say, I have. The word drops like a stone into still water. Ripples strike every face. The Inquisitor nods slowly. Then you will testify. They clear a space. A quill scratches. All eyes fix on you. You feel less like a priest and more like a defendant. What did you read? The Inquisitor demands. You answer truthfully, but carefully. I read of an oath, angels binding themselves in desire. I read of gifts taught, gifts with teeth. I read of children too large for earth to cradle. I read of judgment and of chains. A murmur stirs. The Inquisitor raises a hand. And how did it profit your soul? You pause. This is the knife edge. To say it profited is to confess heresy. To say it damned you is to confess weakness. You speak as if stepping barefoot across shards. It profited me by showing how dangerous fascination is. It profited me by teaching that not all knowledge is bread. Some is stone, some is ash. The Inquisitor studies you. The metal filings in his eyes seem to spark. Then he gestures. The scribes scratch down your words. You are dismissed. No fire, no chains. At least not today. Outside the chamber, you lean against the wall, lungs dragging air as though it were water. Priests shuffle past you, muttering their own conclusions. You catch fragments. Better to erase, no, to curate. The people must never. The people will always. The words swarm, meaningless in their swarm, yet each carries consequence. Back in your study, you find yourself staring at the press-printed copy someone had smuggled to you before the council. Its pages gleam with authority, not given, but taken. You thumb the margins, half expecting to see the old scribbled warning. Instead, there is nothing but type, cold and final. The margins are empty. The book breathes too freely. You think of the footprints beneath the crypt, of the windows whispering warnings in red, of the noblewoman's powders, of Father Matthias's dust. Each fragment was bound, chained, contained. Now the press shatters chains with ink alone. You whisper, what happens when a chain is broken? Not by God, not by angels, but by men with machines? The candle beside you gutters, as if in reply. You dip your pen, scratch a line into your journal. The trial of a book is never the book. It is the trial of us. You spread the fragments on your desk as if arranging bones into a body that might stand. The oath on the mountain. The gifts that gleam and bite. The footprint under the floor. The windows that remember what scribes erased. Father Matthias's dust. The noblewoman's ledger. The press that multiplies what chains once tamed. You do not intend to summon anything. You intend to understand. Yet, understanding you are learning is a kind of summoning. The slow pronunciation of a name made of many syllables. You begin with scripture because you promised yourself you would not wander so far that you could not hear its bell. As in the days of Noah, so shall it be. The line used to feel like thunder far away. Now it presses close, like a breath against glass. The days of Noah were not only rain. They were rumor. The rumor of angels teaching art with knives in it, of giants walking like early verdicts through human streets, of a world busy and beautiful and irreparably slanted. You write, Noah was not a calendar event. Noah was a diagnosis. From diagnosis, you move to grammar. Every story that lasts has one. Parts that know how to reassemble themselves when scattered. You list yours on the page. 1. An oath wrongly sworn. 2. A gift wrapped as progress. 3. A hunger for names that bind the speaker. 4th, an erasure curated in the name of mercy. 5. A trace left in earth and glass. 6. A copying that turns caution into contagion. You stare at the list until it stops being ink and starts being pattern. The pattern behaves like liturgy, a sequence that can be reenacted by anyone willing to follow steps. You feel the first rise of panic, not theatrical, not even loud. It is the panic of recognition when a patient sees his symptoms summarized by a stranger and realizes the illness is old and practiced and has survived better men. You test the grammar against your parish. The oath? Look at the bargains men make with their appetites, dignified by toasts and rings and signatures. The gifts? Look at the forges, the tinctures, the star charts sold as calendars and fates. The hunger for names? Look at how people ask for labels that will make evil accurate and manageable, as if a demon with a precise name were a dog that will heal. The erasures? Look at your own sermons, trimmed to protect the brittle while starving the brave. The traces? Look at the crypt, the windows, the ledger. The press? Look at the way rumor outruns repentance, how a story can arrive at a door before the person who lived it has finished living. You whisper, Lord, is the sentence already writing itself? Silence answers, but not empty silence. Silence heavy with possibility, like a stage before actors enter. You flip back to your notes from the council. We do not destroy, we curate. You copy it into your grammar and add its shadow. We do not reveal, we encode. The windows are faithful conspirators. The bells are old patrols. The calendar is a dance taught to a village, so the night will never find it sitting still. If the night is coming, you resist the theatrics of apocalypse. You have heard sermons that paint the end like a marketplace of thunder, cheap and loud. You have heard scholars tie timelines into knots and call it prophecy. You promised when you were ordained to neither flatter fear nor scold hope. Still, the grammar will not release you. It whispers, this is not about dates. This is about habits. Angelic, human, ecclesial. When those habits align the way they did before, the weather turns the same. You reach for evidence that refuses drama. The footprint. You almost wish it had been a skull, something you could bury and be done with. A footprint, though, is promise, a direction preserved in dirt. It says, this way. You think of the second, shallower mark and the groundsman's big ones turning. Turning where? Toward what? You think of the noble woman and her vow disguised as glamour. You think of the inquisitor's eyes, filings ready to spark, and the press's appetite. You think of Father Matthias's warning that attention itself is bargain. The world is learning swiftly to attend to the forbidden at scale. You test the grammar against yourself, your own oath to preach Christ crucified, to refuse the spectacle that sells and the silence that kills. Your own gift, words, sharp enough to cut or to cauterize. Your hunger to know names, to be the priest who knows the shelf where the dangerous book sleeps. Your erasures, lines you smoothed, edges you rounded, confessions you translated until sin sounded like weather. Your traces, the notes you hide in crabbed hand, the footprints you leave between vestry and crypt. Your copying, the temptation to let the press outside become a press inside, turning caution into multiplication. You set the pen down. A simpler sentence comes, and it terrifies you because it is not clever. Repent, not of reading, not of caring, but of any complicity with the grammar you have just named. You kneel, and the floor answers your knees with its old honesty. You pray without poetry. Lord, break in me the vow to the wrong love. Baptize the gifts again. Muzzle my appetite for names that would bind me. Teach me when to erase for mercy and when erasure is cowardice. Make the traces I leave lead to you. Unlearn me from copying what should be buried. A breeze finds the cracked window. The candle licks sideways and steadies. You rise changed in no visible way. Yet the room is different because you are different to it. You return to the desk and draw 2 columns, one titled Baptize, the other Bury. Under Baptize you write, Forge into plow, pigment into icon, chart into psalm, press into catechism for the simple. Under Bury you write, Oaths to desire, powders that purchase consent, names meant to enthrall, maps that sell fate. You stare until the difference feels less vague. You turn again to Scripture. You read the line as in the days of Noah aloud and notice what you ignored in youth. They were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage. Ordinary life. The end, when it comes, does not announce itself with drums. It arrives to kitchens and markets, to ledgers and gardens. Giants leave prints under churches, while brides choose veils and creditors choose patience. That is the terror and the mercy both. You will still have to preach about bread, even if the ground is moving. A knock startles you. No one stands at the door. Only a folded paper has been slid beneath. A handbill for a bookseller in the market. New works in portable form. Histories, poems, curiosities. Also, the Book of Enoch, with figures. Your chest hollows. Figures. The press has learned what the windows knew. People will read pictures when they refuse to read warnings. You crumple the bill and smooth it again, ashamed of the impulse to tear knowledge like a sin. You tuck it into your journal instead, as a relic of the grammar's next clause. You blow out the candle and speak into the cooling dark. If history rehearses, let the church rehearse better. You think of processions done lazily, bells rung carelessly, windows mistaken for wallpaper. You imagine teaching the altar guild to polish chalices as if they were shields, the choir to sing as if their vowels were barricades, the children to trace the sign of the cross as if drawing bars the wrong captors cannot pass. You are not rallying an army. You are repairing a grammar, God's grammar of humble resistance. You sleep at last and dream nothing you can remember. At dawn you wake with a sentence in your mouth that tastes older than you. Do not confuse ending with unveiling. Perhaps the end is not an event, but a light. When it shines, oaths show their knots, gifts show their teeth, erasures show their ghosts, footprints show their direction. The light does not create the grammar, it makes the grammar legible. Your work is not to predict the light. Your work is to make sure that when it comes, your parish has eyes. You ring the morning bell yourself. The rope burns your palm with the old catechism of friction. Each strike goes up into the cold air and comes down like a measured mercy. The village turns in its sleep. Somewhere a ledger closes. Somewhere a vial is hidden. Somewhere a window inhales the sunrise and pronounces its silent, stubborn sermon. You smile without joy, without despair. The sentence is forming. You will not be its punctuation. You will be its pause long enough for someone to choose differently. The candle on your desk is nearly gone, but you leave it to die on its own. The final inch trembles, then steadies, as if unwilling to release you into the dark. You close the journal, but the words within still burn in your mind. The grammar of oaths and gifts, of erasures and traces. You have seen enough to know the pattern repeats. What you have not seen is how it ends, or if it ever ends at all. Tonight, the parish sleeps easily. You can hear it in the silence outside. No cries from drunkards, no clatter of hooves, no urgent knock from a sickbed. For the first time in weeks, the world feels ordinary, and that ordinariness frightens you more than storms. The days of Noah were ordinary until they weren't. You carry the vial Matthias gave you, the dust whispering in its glass, and stand at the window. Beyond the churchyard, the village lamps wink out one by one. Above them, the constellations keep their rigid court. You trace the belt, the crown, the wheel of stars. You tell yourself they are only patterns, yet the thought refuses to soften. What if patterns themselves are prisons? Your hand shakes. You set the vial on the sill and whisper, "If this is the end, let me hear the beginning in it too." The glass gives no answer, but the silence grows thicker, as if listening. You think of the crypt. You think of the noblewoman's powders, the council's knives scraping vellum, the inquisitor's eyes, the chained book that breathed dust into your lungs. You think of bells rung by hands long dead, of stained glass that remembered what sermons could not say. The fragments form not a map, but a sentence, curling toward a clause you cannot yet read. The candle exhales one last sigh and dies. Darkness takes the room like a slow tide, and in it, you feel the whisper, softer than moth wings, older than ink. As it was, so it shall be. Not because it must, but because men remember poorly. You sink to your knees. Your prayer is not composed, not orderly. It is a raw sound, half plea, half vow. If the watchers stir, let me keep my parish awake. If gifts gleam, let me baptize what can be saved. If traces rise, let me recognize them. If the grammar tightens, let me unbind where I can. And when unveiling comes, let me be candle enough for one moment more. The silence does not lift. It settles on your shoulders like vestments made of shadow. Yet it is not crushing. It feels like a burden fitted to you, heavy but not breaking. You realize with something between fear and gratitude. This is the priesthood you were ordained into without knowing. The priesthood of remembering what should not be spoken, and speaking just enough to guard the sheep from wolves whose names remain unspoken. You rise, heart still trembling, and place the vial back into its cloth. You will not destroy it. You will not display it. You will carry it until another priest, trembling as you do now, needs to learn its weight. That is your covenant, not the covenant of the watchers sworn to desire, but the covenant of keepers sworn to vigilance. Through the shutters, a faint light announces dawn. You have not slept, but you are steadier. You step to the bell rope and wrap it once more around your palm. The rope burns you with a familiar honesty, and the bell above answers with its first strike of the day. The sound rolls out across the parish, across the crypt, across the fields, and up into the sky. You imagine, perhaps foolishly, that it rolls also against bars invisible, ringing in the ears of prisoners caged in constellations. The grammar is not finished. But you know your line, and you will speak it until the last whisper dies or dawn itself unveils what has been waiting all along. The last candle should have gone out. It leans, a thin spear of light, and yet it will not surrender the room. You cup your hand around the flame, as if shielding a secret too small to stand. The parish is waking, ovens, ropes, a mother's hush. But here the air waits for the vow you have not spoken. You do not name the fallen. You do not open chains. You straighten the stole on its peg and breathe the beeswax scent that tells the walls a priest still keeps watch. In your cassock, a vial rides like a quiet star. In the crypt, the earth turns in its sleep. In the windows, the red discs hold their embered warnings. In the sky, the bars pretend to be song. All of it is ordinary. All of it is more. You will preach mercy and mean it. You will teach the children to cross themselves, as if drawing a gate God alone may open. You will visit the sick and bless bread and stand at graves with pockets full of names you never drop. You will ring the bell until your palm remembers courage by scar. When night comes, you will stand at the window and let dark read your face. If the prisoners move, you will hear iron in the wind. If the gifts glitter, you will ask which need baptism and which need burial. If the grammar tightens, you will loosen it with patience and psalms. And if unveiling arrives, you will be content to be a brief candle, refusing for one more breath to die. The flame wavers, steadies. Somewhere a latch lifts. A day steps in. You pinch the wick, but a coal the size of a tear remains, breathing like a heart. You leave it and ring the bell.